Hello everyone, this is Lala and today I'm going to be talking about Season 12 of the challenge, which is Fresh Meat. As I've mentioned throughout the last two seasons, Road Rules was coming to an end where it completely ended, and with that show ending, half of the casting pool essentially ceased to exist. And with a lot of the veterans from that show and the real world either wanting to move on to other pastures or they're becoming way too expensive for the challenge and the production company to deal with. They needed a lot more newbies to come in, but they didn't have another show to pull them from, and they couldn't outsource or they couldn't use too many of the real world people at once, since only one season was being produced at a time, and not all of the people from the real world would have wanted to come on the challenge anyways. With this in mind, they decided to come up with a new concept called Fresh Meat, where people who haven't been on a reality TV show before were cast on the challenge as the first reality show. But these people, or the Fresh Meat, were people who were in the casting pool for either Road Rules or the Real World, but they didn't make it onto any of those final casts, though they made it far enough on the casting pool to catch the producer's interest and to transfer them over the challenge. So that's essentially what happened here. And just from looking at the cast, over half of them are fresh meat, and even some of the quote unquote veterans or alumni, i.e., the real world Austin people, were technically rookies as well. So over half of the cast were rookies, and a lot of these people would become very notable throughout the second era, even if they weren't the most notable in this season in particular. Of course, we had some veterans here, like Theo, who was on this last season, Coral, Katie, Tina, Tanya, Doral, and I'm sure I'm missing some others. And a lot of these people were missing from last season as well. Overall, I do think the format for this season was a lot better than last season, and even some of the others were essentially they do have the lifesavers, which was present on the Inferno seasons, so they have that here, and then the eliminations are essentially exiles, which was decent enough at first, but it kind of got old since they reused the same 3 to 4 exiles at the same time, and the fact that they had to carry bags that were based off of their luggage, or how heavy the luggage was, caused some to have more of an advantage, i.e. Wes and Casey, since their luggage was a lot lighter, and others had heavier luggage, so I didn't like how that was used. In general, this season was pretty decent, though it's never been one of my absolute favorites. When I watched it for the first time a year ago, I thought, it was okay. It's not something that I love, though I know this season is high up on a lot of people's lists. And then I watched it again, and I definitely appreciate it more this time. And I do think it's better compared to a lot of the prior seasons, but I still don't know if it's an upper tier or a favorite season of mine in general. If anything, the season's kind of one that I appreciate more than I really love, if that makes sense. But overall, the format was decent. There is some drama, but it wasn't toxic, though a lot of it more had to deal with the actual game happening. A lot of the fresh meat were pretty good, though there's a decent amounts that were that, but that's kind of the norm with fresh meat seasons as in general. And a lot of the veterans here either were under-edited or their time on the show was coming to the end overall. So let's just get into it. 12 newbies, so people who have never been on reality TV before, but like I've stated before, they were either in the casting process of The Real World or Road Rules, so they were rejects from that show who made it far into the casting process but not on the final casts. The 12 veterans, they aren't all veterans, but 12 reality TV people, since some of the veterans are rookies from the real world Austin, are able to see the stats of the fresh meat to be their partner based on the military drill jobs that they did prior. This is technically the first pair season, and while there were pairs in Battle of the Seasons, they are still functioning under the teams of Road Rules and the Real World, so it doesn't really count there, but it does here. Anyways, the order of the teams that are formed are Danny and Evelyn, Cole and Evan, Darrell and Aviv, Tanya and Johnny, Thea and Chanda, Tina and Kenny, Wes and Casey, Johanna and Jesse, Derek and DM, Katie and Eric, Melinda and Ryan, and Shane and Lynette. It is explained that two pairs will play in exiles instead of eliminations, where one will leave and the other will come back into the game. So everyone is having a good time and having fun, but the real world Austin people, where the two couples want to have a room together so they can essentially have sex and have privacy, which a lot of the people in the house aren't feeling. Stuck on Me is the challenge where they have to go to the balance beam and back, and they're on the highest building ever, with them being tied to one another as paired. So, this challenge really isn't notable whatsoever in my opinion, and was kind of boring to watch. Cora and Evan win the challenge, and they decide who will go to exile. Cora immediately speaks to Evan about how the real world Austin needs to be broken up ASAP, where they choose Wes and Casey to go into exile. Wes and his team plots to have Shane and Lynette to be in, where he realizes that two more votes are needed, so he tries to align with Tanya to get it done. And Danny realizes what a mistake this is, and Tanya sees it as very transparent. It is time for the vote, and the House deliberation goes on for 20 minutes, where they decide that Danny and Evelyn are going against Wes and Casey, though some votes for Tanya and Johnny, and a few of those votes are burn votes against other people in general as well. Danny rants against Johanna for her using a burn vote, where it would have been Johnny and Tanya in over himself and Evelyn had Austin all voted together, and she really has no rebuttal regarding this. Bushwalk or Bushwhacked is the Lifesaver Challenge, and it's interesting that they used the twist this season when it isn't Inferno themed. Wes and Tina start going through, or Wes and Tina start going at it throughout the challenge, and people are clearly targeting the Austin teams in this one. And I do think it's a fun challenge. Cora and Evan win the Lifesaver, and of course they aren't going to use it. The cast is not able to watch the XLs, so both teams have to say goodbye a lot earlier than everyone else, and they say it right at the end of the Lifesaver Challenge, which will be a thing for this season. They have to carry a bag that weighs the amount of stuff that is in the actual luggage, while completing a bunch of puzzles, with this XL being called Beach Course. Wes and Casey went against Danny and Evelyn, and of course Melinda is heartbroken over this. Danny has a lot more of a temper here than I realized just from remembering him in his future seasons, with him for throwing stuff more than once, but it didn't really make him interesting. Apparently he was the star of The Real World Austin, which I haven't watched, so there's a lot of hype behind him regarding him transitioning over to the challenge, but it just never really materialized. Evelyn didn't get a chance to do much, and she was unlucky with the person who chose her, since she's the strongest fresh meat woman based off the stats. I'm looking forward to their trajectory and Evan actually having a chance to do something of note. So, the next episode starts with DM and Derek going on a walk, and she reveals her cancer diagnosis to him, which is ovarian cancer, and it's a very nice moment between the two of them. She had a cyst surgery removal 4 weeks before the season, and then she has to go through treatment after the season, and she cries because she might not be able to do something like this again. And we do know that she does many other challenge seasons like this again, but I could only imagine the fear of something like this happening to someone in general, and how they would feel. Cole is plotting to have more members of Austin to be put into exile, and the other Austin people already know what it is, pertaining their placement in the house. The challenge is called Hang On, where one person from each pair is upside down on a bar and then has to hold a partner below them as they are pulled above the sea. And I do like the challenge as well as the mechanisms of it overall. Since Cole and Evan choose the Austin people to go first, everyone can learn from their mistakes to outperform them in the challenge, which does end up happening. Cole and Evan win the challenge yet again, and it's 3 in a row, and Thea is annoyed that they beat him, and he got second. Evan and Cora plot about who to put in out of the Austin trio, and they end up choosing Melinda and Ryan to be sent to exile. Wes and Casey speak to Evan, and Wes wants to vote himself into exile, but he apparently wants to vote in Johnny and Tanya at the elimination, but no one has the balls to do so. Johanna ends up crying due to all this, and Tina's over their lovey-dovey bullshit. Ryan and Melinda are trying to build some confidence amongst themselves to prepare themselves for exile, and we end the episode with seeing flirtation, or more flirtation, between Derek and DM. Melinda is calling Danny, though he was just eliminated. And it's interesting how people in these seasons had free access to just call anyone who they wanted, and they had their own cell phones, which is something that's definitely not the case nowadays. And they have their scheduled weekly conversations, and they didn't have a free telephone device just to call anyone. But anyways, she's complaining about the situation in the house, though she states that it is really Danny who wanted to do the challenge over herself. And we see this a lot with people who are in pairs and end up getting put on the challenge. Ryan knows that she is not all in it, and he does not want his opportunity to be screwed due to her wanting to go home to her boyfriend. Jailbreak is the lifesaver challenge where they have to eat a plate to find a key, and then they run across a course, which is fine enough. Theo and Chanda wind up winning the lifesaver, and the nominees immediately go to Excel. Forest course is the Excel elimination where they carry bags based on the weight of their luggage, and they have to do a diagram puzzle and pick flags. Where Ryan forgot his at one point, but Wes and Casey end up beating Melinda and Ryan, and the house is annoyed with his cockiness. I don't have a lot to say about Melinda and Ryan in general. She was a bit mopey during her short time on the season, and she mentioned that she didn't want to do this as much as her boyfriend at the time did, and Ryan himself didn't stand out much at all on the season. I know both of them have many more opportunities on the main show and the All-Star spin-off to make names for themselves, so we will see how that goes and how I feel about them there. Johanna and Wes are having a good time, and Tina is sick of Wes's sexist ass, where she feels bad for Johanna for having to deal with him. Wes knows that his girlfriend is in the weakest pair in the house, so he has to avoid her getting voted into elimination. So he's definitely plotting around it. We do see Tina and her partner Kenya having a very playful relationship, and they give it to one another equally when it comes to verbal sparring and pranking. The challenge is called Climber's Paradise, where they have to climb a rocking wall in 10 minutes, and it's a mad challenge in general, in my opinion. Tina fucks up immediately as the challenge started, and she knows that she is in trouble. Coral and Evan win the challenge in 10 seconds, where Tanya and Jeremy and Thea and Chanda are annoyed as hell at the winning streak of Coral and Evan. Wes tries to strategize with Coral and asking her to pick a weak team that isn't Johanna, and he will volunteer to go in, but Coral clearly is not here for it at all. Evan and Coral vote in Wes and Casey, and it causes Wes and Johanna to hardcore argue and go at it, since he tells her that she has to campaign to stay in the competition, and she tells her partner to do it. She knows that nothing is going to change, so she isn't even going to try, and Tina has all of her friends here, so it's pointless to campaign for Tina and Kenny to go in. He tells her to shut up, he calls her stupid, he then calls everyone stupid, and she ends up throwing a water bottle at him. Wes comes off horribly here, and he's just really cocky as hell, and honestly it's not the best look for Johanna as well. I see why the relationship ended, and they're just very toxic. And Theo calls Wes delusional, and he throws some more shade at him in the confessionals. And it's clear that he's using these confessionals to prop himself up as a comedian for his future career in comedy. Johanna and Jesse have voted into elimination, so it's girlfriend and boyfriend fighting one another unless they win the lifesaver. Wes calls Danny on the phone and is complaining about the situation, and he tells Danny that Johanna is horrible in the game, and she's crying about not being enough for the game, where even Cora and Tina are comforting her regarding Wes. Wes and Johanna are complaining about one another to others, and they're annoying the hell out of me. We see a costume party and everyone is having fun, but Tanya is having a bit too much fun, though people are shading her for doing too much. Johanna and Wes finally speak where it's too much of the smushy bullcrap that I just don't care about. Rolling oats is the lifesaver challenge where they have to carry as much oats as possible on their bodies and to put it into a bucket. I think it's a decent enough challenge, but it's not one of the better or worse challenges in comparison. There's growing tension with Jessie and Tanya, and Coral uses her boobs to advantage in the challenge. Or double D boobs, I should say. With Coral and Evan winning yet again. Cliffside course is the elimination where they of course have to carry the bags, but they have to carve some lines in a puzzle, and Wes is showing his misogynistic ass with how he speaks to Casey. And apparently she was just as bad as him, but they didn't show it in the edit, according to some of the cast. Jesse and Johanna realize too late that they did not get the fights that they needed and they're about to finish. So of course Wes and Casey eliminate Jesse and Johanna. Before she leaves, Johanna lectures Wes about calling Casey a bitch, and he wouldn't want anyone calling his future daughter that, though we do see Casey yelling at Wes due to his actions getting them into exile. Tanya is talking on the phone about, or she's complaining about her partner on the phone to someone. I don't really remember who it is. Jessie was forgettable as hell, and it's not shocking that he never returned after this. Johanna was a poor competitor throughout the season, and her drama with Wes was very annoying. But I know she has a few more seasons, so let's see how that ends up turning out. We see that there are a lot of issues with Tanya and Johnny, and Wes is ranting Johanna on the phone about his situation, even though she literally just got home. We do see Evan talking to his mother on the phone about having a ripped hernia, which is a huge issue, but he does not want to screw up his winning momentum and to end it for Coral. The challenge is called Crossed Paths, where they have to cross paths on a platform in the air, and this challenge is a bit nerve-wracking to watch, to be honest. Theo and Chanda end up winning the challenge, and they're thinking about sending in Tina and Kenny or Tanya and Johnny, but they end up going with the safe move of voting in Wes and Casey. Wes claims to be so excited about which of the quote-unquote friend group will be voted in since there's no Austin team to pit him against. And we do see a scramble, but a lot of the house wants to vote in Tanya and Johnny. And Derek doesn't want to vote in Tanya, but she is at the low end of the vets. And Katie mentions that the veterans have an alliance, essentially. Are the ones who spent the last few seasons together. Tina is very pissed that Coral, her friend, voted her in, but ultimately Tanya and Johnny are voted in. This would be the start of Derek's more spineless gameplay, or this would be a hint of Derek's more spineless gameplay that kind of plagues his challenge career after this season, and Tanya is pissed off at Derek, who is getting very defensive about it in general. The two end up arguing, and she knows that it isn't based on merit or challenge performance, which is what he's stating, but it's because she's not liked by the other veterans. Tanya is reeling, and she wants to win, so she can vote in Tina. And winning the lifesaver, that's what I'm referring to. Since they've had issues since Battle of the Sexes 2, and they do flashback to their fight from that season. About 3 seasons, or 3 years ago. We do see some slight flirtman slash showman stuff with Lynette and Theo, which Evan calls her out about in the next morning. The incredible deflating kayak is the lifesaver challenge, and it's a deflatable kayaking challenge. Pretty self-explanatory. Shayna and Lynette beat Darrell and Aviv by 4 seconds. Forest course is the exile elimination, and Tanya knows that she is screwed, since she packed everything in her bags. Wes and Casey end up beating Tanya and Johnny, and we end the episode with more Theo and Lynette content. Tanya was still very messy in the season, and I did find her to be pretty entertaining in the season, though her storyline was getting a bit repetitive here. Johnny being annoyed with his partner is relatable, but he himself didn't offer anything, so I'm not shocked that he never came back after this season. Tina and Kenny are talking about how they are going to avoid Excel all season, but they really need to perform better in the challenges. Coral and Evan are worried, since they have not gotten first in the last 2 challenges, and Evan is still worried about the hernia that he is hiding, but it might cause them to get pulled at some point, which we know that it eventually does. We do see Wes wrestle with Eric, and then he throws Katie into the pool. The partnership seems to notice that they're in danger of going home, so clearly they'll be nominated at some point during this round, and I'm referring to Katie and Eric. The challenge is swimming with sharks, where they have to go in the water with the sharks to grab puzzle pieces and then complete the puzzle. I do think this is a cool challenge, though it was scary seeing them with the sharks in general. Shane and Lynette end up winning the challenge again, and they decide to choose Eric and Katie since they've been the weakest team performance-wise. The house decides to vote in Tina and Kenny for exile, though Tina ends up snapping when Kenny votes for themselves, despite them discussing their votes earlier, and this wasn't part of the plan. And I do notice in general that Kenny doesn't have the same energy he has with women in future seasons that he does with Tina, because he knows Tina will fight back and she won't break, or back down from him. So Kenny's very selective with who he chooses to exert this energy onto. We see Evan remove his clothes at a club, and Wes is coaching Eric and Katie on how to do in the exile, since he knows that Eric and Katie will not vote off or not vote himself and Casey into exile for the future, and knows that it's a big shot that needs to be taken. Tina ends up knowing that Wes is coaching Katie and Eric, so clearly he isn't hiding it whatsoever, and it's just really sloppy on Wes's part. And no one is expecting her or Kenny to come back from exile. The lifesaver is human ox pull, where they have to pull a piece of hay over a long 100-meter yard, though Evan is nervous about his injury. I actually do like this challenge, and it was a bunch of pairs being attached to one another, attached to one or two haystacks here. Evan's hernia feels really bad, and Coral knows that she messed up her knee, with her kneecap being out. Both of them are in the infirmary at this point while the challenge continues. Darrell and Aviv end up winning the lifesaver, and the exile pair say goodbye to everyone. The doctors give Evan advice not to continue with the show, but he doesn't intend on listening at this point. Beach course is the exile, where Tina and Kenny does end up beating Eric and Katie, though Kenny is yelling at Tina the entire time. Anyways, Coral has to be transferred to another hospital an hour and a half away, though the cast is talking about them for sure getting DQ'd. Eric and Katie were kind of the comic relief of the season, with them both being weak competitors, and they did bring some much needed humor in the season, and they weren't trying to be funny like Wes and even Theo were. Neither of their journeys are anywhere close to being over, so let's see what will happen and how I will feel about them in their future seasons. Ivan comes back into the house, though he knows that there's a 99% chance that he's going to blow his hernia, but he's going to ignore it nonetheless. Coral comes back into the house, and they pop her knee back in its socket, but it's clear to everyone that they both are downplaying their injuries. At this point, production should have just immediately pulled them instead of letting it fester, especially the Evan situation. Apparently, DM, Aviv, and Lynette are really close to one another, so that's clearly going to be focused on in a negative way in the episode, or during this round. They do decide to pull Coral and Evan right before the challenge starts, though they both are begging to stay in the game, and you really do feel for them. Both of them had really good seasons on a competitive point of view, and it would have been cool to see them continue on, where they probably would have made it to the end, though we know how nasty of a turn things took with, or would take with them on the Gauntlet 3. Coral was still funny here, and Evan comes off as likable this season, which unfortunately won't last for him. The challenge is called Battle Down the Hatches, where they have to climb down the ladder. They are very high in the air at this point, and climb onto the other's ladder. Wes and Tina are talking about how they need to team up since they know that they are at the bottom with their partners, and they will probably be put into exile. I didn't care for this challenge at all, and it was just ridiculous in my opinion. Derek and DM do end up winning the challenge, and they choose Shane and Lynette because Derek coaches her and pressures her into it. Lynette is very sad and mad about it, and Tina has to calm down Deanne, who is hysterically crying at this point. Darrell sees Wes plotting out in the open and exposes Wes in front of everyone in the deliberation. The plan is immediately blown, and they start voting for one another, causing Wes and Casey to go into exile. Wes makes a homophobic comment about not being scared about going against the gay guy, pretty much insinuating that Shane is weaker because he is gay. DM is sad and is running to Aviv and Lynette, and nothing interesting comes from this, though this was supposed to be, or this could have been a dramatic moment. Theo and Lynette are hooking up, and he's trying to cheer her up for the Lifesaver Challenge. The challenge is called Jump Down Under, where they have to drop a high steep into water, go onto a launch, and climb the huge float, and then swim to their destination, which was kind of just a meh challenge in my opinion as well. DM mentions to Aviv and Lynette that she won't choose them as first, but of course she goes back on it once again. I don't have much to think about regarding the challenge overall here. Derek and DM do of course win the Lifesaver, and the exile takes place right away, which is Cliffside Course. To the surprise of no one, Wes and Casey end up beating Shane and Lynette. Derek and DM feel at the top of the world, though Aviv does not trust her, and things are looking up for Wes and Casey. Honestly, Lynette was boring as hell, and she had the chance to have some drama or do something memorable in general, but she did nothing. I'm not shocked that she didn't come back. And Shane was the same mode this season, as he was pretty under the radar and wasn't as funny now, though he had some good challenge performances in the season. He wouldn't return for about a decade, where he completely changed, but he became a lot more interesting. But that's eons away at this point. Eric and DM are getting pretty flirty with one another, and honestly, it's pretty crazy how forgotten this interaction is, since we all know about her relationship with CT, which will form on the very next season, so this kind of gets left in the shadows. Tina is talking about how Kenny is one of the sweetest guys ever, despite his very tough exterior, and I don't know about that, but if there is a sweet side, he never really showed it on the challenge. Derek, Darrell, and Theo have an alliance, which makes sense since they are veterans and they've played on the last few seasons together. And with him bringing it up here, I'm assuming that he, meaning Theo, is going to be turned on. The challenge is Deep Blue, where they have to dive deep into the ocean without any life gear. And honestly, it's ridiculous that they don't have any safety gear for this. And then they have to swim back up without going too deep. But the goal is to grab a flag. Honestly, I don't like the challenge. It is way too unnerving, and I see why the challenge production is looked down upon in the reality TV universe, where I have to think that this would be one of their most dangerous challenges in general. Anyways, Derek and DM win their third challenge in a row, and of course the two decide to turn on another agreement, with turning on Theo and Chanda, which causes Theo to be blindsided. Derek is worried about Doral and Aviv being voted in by the House, and that ends up happening. And Wes has been waiting for this moment to make a huge move, and now he has it. Derek is not pleased with the move, since his friend Doral is in danger. The episode does end with DM and Derek kissing several times at a club. Theo is preparing to go into exile, and Derek really feels guilty about the move that they made, though DM thinks that he holds resentment against her for it. Theo and Doral are planning on one of them winning the lifesaver, since they don't want to have to face each other in exile. The lifesaver is called target training, where they have to climb over walls, crawl, and run over/under a bunch of obstacle courses and shoot their targets. It's essentially the military training boot camp challenges that you see on a lot of these shows, and it's really fun. Darrell and Aviv do end up winning the lifesaver, and they decide to have Tina and Kenny replace them in exile. Each course is the exile, and Tina and Kenny do end up beating Theo and Chanda. DM is really happy that her and Derek's plan ended up working, and they're clearly setting up the duo for a pride before the fall. Chanda really was not a notable personality, despite performing pretty well in the challenges, so I'm really not shocked that she never came back. Theo was not as funny as he was in the prior seasons, though he was clearly trying to be. But he, of course, did perform pretty well in the challenges for the most part, and this was a decent enough end for his challenge career. Honestly, I didn't know until recently that he was so salty about his time on the show, since it apparently harmed his comedy career or whatever, but it's just kind of ridiculous how he handled the situation in the years since. Ram is worried about having to do treatments after the season is over, since the season is about to end filming, where Tina and Kenny know that the plan is to throw them in against Wes and Casey amongst the house plan. 1 o'clock is the challenge, where they have to wrap themselves around a pole and hold on to it while it spins. The winner of the challenge chooses both of the teams going into exile, but in the first round, they have to do it by themselves, and in the second round, they have to wrap themselves with their partner. Tina and Kenny win the challenge, and they choose Daryl and Aviv and Derek and DM to go into exile. DM ends up snapping at Tina for voting her in, since she has no loyalty or anything, and she snapped at Kenny too, since they saved the two as well, though Tina tells DM to take her anorexic ass out of her face. I don't know if Tina knew about DM's cancer or not, so while this makes Tina look bad, I don't know if she understood the full context of it. But anyways, Tina mentions that it is a move that needs to be made to benefit herself and Kenny, and she thanks Kenny for carrying her, since that's what DM mentioned as some sort of insult towards her. Dorel and Aviv end up beating Derek and DM, though Aviv does mention DM's treatment, so maybe Tina did know. DM is crying about having to do the treatment and is grateful that the season made her feel normal for 5 weeks, and all this is just really sad and heartwarming. Derek had a more villainous and cutthroat vibe to him in the season, which was refreshing compared to what he will be in the future, and his partnership with DM is cute enough. And this was especially this after Mark essentially gave him the title of being the new face of the show. So it's interesting to seeing how he handled it this season, especially knowing how that didn't really pan out in the future. But anyways, you really do feel for DM and her journey with cancer, especially when you know the results. But you definitely do see a more entitled side of her at times, and that's kind of covered by her edit. But it will be interesting watching her journey throughout the next several seasons in these two eras, and it's kind of sad watching that they covered her final 8 to 9 years of her life on camera. Now, let's talk about the final. And in general, I always find finals to be pretty boring, even compared to normal challenges, so I never have much to say about them. So the final for this season is called Miles of Exile, where they have to run a 10-mile final, but they do come across a bunch of puzzles, and you have 3 attempts to complete the puzzle, where the more times you fail, the heavier weight you have to add to your bags. Overall, like I mentioned, the final was kind of just pretty boring, but overall, Durrell and Aviv end up winning, though we do see Tina and Kenny arguing a lot throughout the final. Wes and Casey got a lot of screen time in the season due to them being underdogs and having to go to exile a bunch of times. Wes was an outright douchebag asshole in the season, and while he was strategic and somewhat funny at times, he in general was just very icky here. Casey has a lot of personality, which I forgot about before rewatching the season, and she's one of the prime examples of casting people for personality instead of athleticism on a reality TV show is a good thing, which is something that is desperately missing on recent challenge seasons. Anyways, they as a pair and as individuals brought a lot to the season. Tina was definitely on fire this season, with the sense of humor she had and the drama she caused throughout the season with Kenny, DM, and probably a few others, and she was able to hold her own not only as a character but as a player without Veronica and Rachel being around. And I feel like that's a true testament to someone who is a strong challenger in the personality and the gameplay department, where they can hold their own without their allies. Kenny was somewhat likable in the season, though you do see the douchiness that he would be known for here, sprinkled here and there, but they both gave it to one another equally, and it was an interesting dynamic, since they are both alphas who are used to running over people, but they cannot run over one another. Durrell is a four-time winner, and I never felt like he was the quote-unquote face of a season or the strongest performer. He is someone who is a consistently strong performer and got a bit of an under-the-radar edit for a lot of the season, even compared to his other seasons, though part of that might have to do with his partner. Apparently, Aviv spent a lot of time in the season on the phone with her boyfriend, and she really didn't do much interesting in the season at all. It is interesting watching her while her return to the show 18 years later is happening as I speak, and she's a lot more interesting on 40, and it's only been a few episodes. And it's interesting because when I first watched this season about a year ago, I had no thoughts on her at all. But now that she's on 40 and I'm rewatching it at that time, now I have to really focus on her. So that's kind of interesting. So I couldn't find any access to whatever reunion the season had online, so I'm ending it here. Honestly, I don't really have much to say. I think the format is pretty solid. I think the casting for the most part is solid, though of course there are a few duds with the fresh meats, but a lot of them offered a lot in the season and did become important to the future. A lot of the veterans were good, even though some of them are definitely on the last days pertaining the show. There was some drama, but it wasn't the toxic drama that this era specifically would be known for, and a lot of it did involve the gameplay. There was some interesting gameplay here and there. At the same time, it's just never one of my absolute favorites. I do think it's better than a lot of the Era 1 seasons just due to them having a proper format and actually knowing the direction that they wanted the challenge to go into as a show and being very focused and linear on that. But yeah, this season in a lot of ways is kind of like a reset season, and I think it did its job fine enough. And I think the importance of this season is, or it stands out more to me than the actual quality of this season. At the end of the day, this will probably be like a mid-tier season or upper to mid-tier season. I just don't have it as one of my absolute favorites like a lot of others do. So you definitely see a lot of the phasing out of the Era 1 people and the phasing in of the Era 2 people. And a lot of the Era 1 people, especially the men that made it over to be consistent figures in Era 2, you notice that a lot of them don't have those huge personalities, which is why a lot of them don't become the faces of the show, but just consistent supporting characters. Anyways, I am looking forward to continuing this journey with Era 2 and seeing how some of the Era 1 people hang in there, seeing the Era 2 people become faces of their own and establishing themselves on the challenge, and seeing with the format solidified for the most part how the show goes on. Thank you all for watching. I'll be back with more content soon. Bye.